right. So, let's see. So, it, sorry, it's recording now. What we're going to do here is we've got a list of questions that the user generated. They'll come up with more during it, and mods have basically pinned good questions, so we can just go through and ask the best questions. Before we jump right into that, would you like to give an introduction to who you are and what your beliefs are?
Absolutely. So, my name is Keith Knight. I run the Keith Knight Don't Tread on Anyone YouTube, BitChute, Minds, Archive.org channel. I primarily focus on philosophy, economics, history, morality. I also do some conspiracy research. Basically, when I say anarcho-capitalism, to define my terms, I would start by defining communism, as Karl Marx did in the Communist Manifesto, the abolition of private property. I would define socialism as the institutionalized aggression against private property, and capitalism as a social system based on the explicit recognition of private property and non-aggressive contractual exchanges between private property owners. I would say the state is illegitimate because it basically claims ownership or claims positive obligations on people and with property it has not acquired through voluntary exchange or original appropriation. Long story short, the way I sort of see the world is there are two ways to achieve your ends: voluntarily and violently. What makes government a unique institution is it initiates violence against peaceful people in an institutionalized way that is recognized as legitimate by the populace. So, with all the shortcomings in the world and all the things that can go wrong in private societies or with private industry, my general belief, my claim, is that a voluntarily funded competition in, let's say, the court system or anything else is superior to a coercively funded monopoly. So every bad thing that you could say about Walmart, Amazon, the Pinkertons also applies tenfold to the state, because you can't be recognized as opting out of cooperating with them, contracting with them, or funding them. That is who I am, and that is my general belief system.
All right. So I'd like to start off with a question. How do you feel about the term libertarian? Is this something you would, ascribe to, and what do you see as views different from yours that fit within the term?
A libertarian I see as defined by Murray Rothbard in his 1974 book For a New Liberty: anyone who advocates or recognizes the moral legitimacy of the non-aggression principle, which is basically saying morality is rooted in consent. It is the fundamental difference between rape and lovemaking, trade and theft, enslavement and employment, um, kidnapping and going over to someone's house for dinner. So, yes, I recognize libertarianism as legitimate. There is a large disagreement between libertarians and anarcho capitalists. Some say, well, libertarians just want a very, very small government. They're fiscally conservative and socially liberal. I do not think that is a legitimate, principled way of defining libertarianism or having a philosophy based in freedom. So, yes, I would consider myself a libertarian, a voluntarist, an anarcho capitalist, natural law theorist. I believe all of those do apply, both in complementary ways.
Okay. So just for clarity here, I'm not sure I fully understand that, but would a classical liberal, in your terms, count as a libertarian?
Yes.
Okay.
Classical liberals such as Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich Hayek, and Milton Friedman would be categorized as libertarians because they had recognized the state in its unique purpose, which was the recognized right to initiate violence against peaceful people and a monopoly right so far as the populace was concerned.
Okay. So our Next question comes from user E. He asks, do you think policing in an ANCAP society would be prone to corruption? How do you propose corruption be handled in this money-based corporate policing machine?
Sure. So I actually really have no clue what private security would be like. I do know that I definitely feel safer in private places than in public places. But let's say those places were privatized and you needed a voluntarily funded security force. The reason I would feel safer, not purely safe, not everything would be perfect. The reason I believe it's superior to a status provided police system is because you have the recognized ability to opt out. So when you see the cops choking Eric Garner to death for allegedly selling Lucy's, well, anyone who's sane would not fund that organization unless their response was to fire that employee immediately. But instead, of course, he was promoted. So when you have things like police and courts that you can't opt out of funding when you are forced to chip in, of course we would recognize poor service. We'd recognize, we would expect to see poor quality. So again, I will enact the principle that everything bad you could say about voluntarily funded competing police agencies applies 50-fold to a statist police agency.
Okay. So, just for everyone in the chat, reminder, you can ask your questions in Keith Knight AMA questions, and if you want to ask it yourself, mark VC at the beginning of the question. So our next one comes from Radioactive Beans. He asks, how are children's rights explained from first principles, and how does the non-aggression principle apply to them?
With children, it especially applies, I think, because in a way they don't have the mental capacity to consent. So in the same way, if I am put in a coma and my hand moves in such a way with a pen in it, I can't be held liable morally justly for signing on to, say, a mortgage or something. Or if I say something out of line, or I promise to do something when I'm blackout drunk, I wouldn't necessarily give someone consensual status. In the same way, when someone is a child, they don't have the mental capacity to consent to sex or living with someone else, really. That's when our moral standards should be the highest, when someone doesn't really have a lot of options. As bad as, friend abuse is, the friend does have the ability to move and go elsewhere. So I would say when dealing with children, because they are pretty much there involuntarily, they don't choose to be there. They don't have a lot of wiggle room as far as they can't go buy another house or something. Um, I would say it's extra important that we recognize their autonomous abilities, make sure that no one's initiating unjust harm on them. So I would say first principles that the child has a better claim to their body than anyone else. Therefore, for anyone to initiate long term perpetuated violence on it, or on the child rather, is unjust. So I would say that differentiates between you do not have the ability to, or you don't have the right to sleep with a child because that is long term trauma that absolutely initiates aggression, and it is not necessary for the well being of the child. Whereas you do have the right to force them to stay on your property, even if they want to leave, even if they want to, drink or smoke cigarettes, you have the right to forcibly stop them from doing so. So I would say, again, it all goes back to whether or not someone has the mental capacity to do something. It would also apply to drunk people, people in comas, people who are mentally retarded. Uh, so, yeah, I'm not exactly sure how those things would be enforced. Again, I don't think the existence of a coercively funded monopoly improves the well being of children. As far as I'm concerned, the way states treat kids in government schools and in foreign policy wars based on lies, it's never the kids who they really care about. The kids don't exactly vote. So they're pretty much at the bottom of the totem pole. So my general answer is, if we embrace the non-aggression principle consistently, we'd apply it to children more so than anyone else, and kids would do better overall in a voluntarist society.
Okay. Our next question comes from Jordan Phillips. He asks, how can we convince people that anarchism is a better alternative to statism and undoing the conditioned belief that we need an authority to tell us how to live?
Yeah, that that is definitely a big question. There's a number of approaches. So if I say to someone, what makes government a unique institution? What's the difference between government and Catholic? What do you think government has the right to do that the Catholic Church can't? Anything they say about, well, the state has the right to initiate taxes for the greater good, engage in gun control, and if you don't send your kid to school, well, the parents should be jailed, so just send them to school. Well, what if the Catholic Church did that? What if the NRA did that? What if the Koch brothers or Walmart or Amazon did that, or the Church of Scientology did that? Would your response be, well, we need to start voting every 4 years but on who gets to be pope, and then it'll be legitimate? Well, of course not. So one way is applying the same principles people have to all other organizations to the state. Very often they already believe in these things. It's just a matter of saying, hey, this nonviolence, this voluntarism thing you believe in, you know how mass murder's wrong when the Vegas shooter does it? It's also mass murder if someone writes words down on paper, calls it foreign policy, and starves millions through sanctions, bombings, and drone strikes. I mean, there was an article in the Huffington Post that had 1 year of drone strike policies under Obama, I think was the last time they were really measured. And it said about 90% of those killed in drone strikes weren't even the target. Now, forget the fact that defined target means, you one time were in the same coffee shop as a supposed terrorist. If any other organization engaged in that large scale coercively funded violence, we'd say you have to be a psycho to associate yourself with them. So by holding people's principles consistently is one way to do it, asking them if they have the right to do the things that the state does. Well, if you don't have the right to regulate other people, which is code for violent domination, if you don't have the right to force labor under the guise of a draft, how can you vote for a senator to have that? If government gets its rights from the people and the people don't have the right to do something, how can they vote for government to do it on their behalf? That is Those are basically two ways. Another method is referred to as candles in the dark. This is promoted by an anarchist named Larkin Rose, who I've spoken to for about 8 hours on my channel. He says basically engaging in a series of Socratic questions with a statist or someone who does believe in authority that can bring out the inner voluntarist that is already inside them. In the same way that I did with the Catholic Church example, in the same way I did it with the, well, do you have the right to do this? Or just the state? Okay, just the state does. Why them? Why do they have a monopoly on this thing if it's inherently good? Holding people to consistent principles, I think, is the best way to spread the philosophy of truth and reason.
Okay. Next question. What would you say to someone who says that property is theft and profit is exploitation?
So, property, I would define as scarce, rivalrous, physical goods that are just if they are acquired through voluntary exchange or original appropriation. So, whether it's a phone or a car or a toothbrush, as many like to use, or a house. Now, let's say either of those things. I use, let's say, my phone and my laptop. Let's say I use those to start making money, making videos in which I sell goods. Those items now go from personal property to private property, according to the Marxist, communist doctrine. I don't believe there is any principled difference between private property and personal property where they make the distinction. So, for example, they say, yeah, it's all right if you own a car, but you can't own a factory, because the factory, you're really making money off of something when you're not directly engaged in the labor. But every other thing that I mentioned previously, say my house, if I own my house and then start selling things out of my house, turning it into a business, there is no principal difference between a house and a house that I sell things out of, called a business. If I'm engaged in voluntary contract, there's nothing wrong with that. The communist also believes that it's okay to walk by an empty field and do nothing with it. But if I build 100 houses and then offer people rent, well, now I'm engaged in exploitation. If I do nothing to solve homelessness, I provide no people with food, no people with houses, no people with products or services, well, then I'm good. I'm part of the proletariat class. But then if I start providing people with things, well, now I'm exploiting them because I'm also benefiting from it. Imagine you're an employee who spends 50 cents a day on gas getting to work, and at work you make $100 a day. Your profit of $99.50 does not make you an exploiter. If you are engaged in a voluntary contract with someone, it is totally just for them to make a profit. Profit is also something that's not only monetary, it's also, I guess you could say, psychic or emotional. A lot of the things we do so in hopes of it'll cost me this much time, but I'll receive this much benefit from it. So, yeah, it'll be worth driving, 2 hours to see the family because I'll get to spend time with them. That is you profiting. In the same way the employee profits, profit is simply getting more than you've put in. Great thing about markets and free markets, actually, and voluntary transactions is if you don't think it's a good deal for you, you can opt out. So while it might appear from afar that someone is not getting a great deal, it's still important that we don't use the state or any other violent mechanism to stop people from engaging in said exchange. If you want to do what's best for the poor, definitely don't look at what they're doing and then outlaw it, because they obviously, that is unfortunately the best of their choices. So that is my answer to property. I don't believe there's a principal difference between personal and private, so long as I've continuously used voluntary contracts to, associate with people who are in the factory. They voluntarily say, sure, $10 an hour, that works for me. Or if they say $0 an hour, I want an internship, but in 6 months, if I do well, can you write me a good review so I could put it on my resume? Or I could put it on my LinkedIn account with your stamp of approval. If I want to work for 4 years at a university and pay them, well, that is also a right that I have. That is like the opposite. That's like the greatest alternative to getting to working. Imagine you work and then get paid, and that's exploitation. But you can voluntarily give your money to a university, study for 4 years, and get no money. And that is somehow seen as legitimate. Well, maybe it's because about 17% of professors in the social sciences identify as Marxists that we don't see that connection made too often. But hey, I don't know what's best for other people. All I know is people should be acting voluntarily.
Okay, so that opens up a few questions I think we want to follow up on there. First, in your definition of property, you described it specifically as physical goods with a few other conditions. Can I take us to mean that you don't believe in intellectual property?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Could you state why you do not believe in intellectual property?
Of course. So say that I come across a piece of wood and I turn it into a chair. Assume I'm the very first person to do this. I have a terrific idea. While I did a ton of work, and I would be doing a lot of work that other people benefited from, I do not believe I then acquire the right to initiate violence against other people who, with their wood, choose to make chairs. Even though I came up with the idea, I don't think that entitles me to all the minerals in the world to stop people from engaging in what they'd like to do peacefully. So let's say I make a computer I did not come up with the idea of a computer, or if I write a book, I didn't come up with the idea of a book. Even if I pretty much rip off The Lord of the Rings, I am not initiating aggression against, I forget who did Lord of the Rings. I am not forcibly stopping anyone from engaging in their commercial transaction. So, in that sense, I am totally justified in doing whatever I do. I also think intellectual property is claiming to own an idea. And I would define, I guess I can't come up with a definition, but an idea is generally a concept in your head. And if someone else has the ability to stop me from communicating something that's peaceful, stop me from thinking, stop me from spreading the word, that is a violation of my individual body. That's a violation of my right to do with my property what I'd like to do. So there is the downside of, yeah, sometimes, people are going to work, make some other people are going to copy it. But at the same time, well, then that stops there being a terrible monopolist who gets one idea, claims a monopoly on, and then any judge he can that is too similar forcibly stop him from engaging in productivities. That is justified. So I don't believe in intellectual property because it is not scarce in the sense my interacting with it does not violate your rights in interacting with whatever property you acquire and trade for whatever purposes.
Okay. So this might sound like a joke, but a lot of people are curious. What are your thoughts on Alex Jones?
You can make a video on a channel called Everything I Learned from Alex Jones. My long and short is I really thought he had a lot to bring to the table, and now I think he is a sucker for Donald Trump, unfortunately. But that's what happens when you start believing in individuals too much instead of ideas, or when you're dedicated to a person rather than truth, reason, and morality. I see it happen all the time in anarcho-capitalist circles as well, and I know that it happens to me too. So I'm saying it applies to everyone, including me. Unfortunately, I think Alex Jones was too into Trump is my guy. He's anti-globalist, so that which Trump does is that which is right and that which should be defended. Unfortunately, I mean, he did call him out after, the Syria thing, I think after red flag laws, but I mean, I really don't watch him. What I did was I watched a lot of Alex Jones documentaries and watched a lot of his interviews. So I think on net, he has done great things. That's why I made the video on my channel. I think I titled it Everything I Learned from Alex Jones, a Tribute. When I started making it and I was going through my research notes, I thought it would be like a 5 or 10 minute video, but it ended up being like longer than an hour just because there really is so much valuable stuff that he brings to the table, unfortunately. I think one thing that I've heard about researchers is that when they come across great information and get a great following, people then start to expect a ton from them. So when after a while, when they don't have the money shot of big Operation Northwoods like information, Operation Mockingbird, COINTELPRO, PatCon, when you don't have any more of that stuff, you absolutely start exaggerating things that are not worth the amount of time and effort. So for example, he said Sandy Hook just didn't happen. And then he cowered to Megyn Kelly and saying, well, the media is spinning this. And I go, God, what a coward. That's just terrible. Look, man, you were wrong. You were just wrong about that one. Swing and a miss. And the fact that he couldn't admit that, I just thought was so sad. But it doesn't take away the fact that I think he has more courage for sneaking in Bohemian Grove and publishing the documentary Dark Secrets inside Bohemian Grove. I think he has, more integrity than all of Fox, all of CNN, and all of MSNBC, and especially ABC after that Amy Robach nonsense. So I think he's a net benefit to society, but I think we have to really be able to appreciate the good things that he's brought while being able to call him out for terrible things he's done, and just the overall cowardice and not being able to admit when he's wrong, when it was such a great opportunity for him to lead by example.
Okay. Our next question comes from Bait. Bait asks, does militant pacifism play a role in anarcho-capitalism? That
So
peace. So they just want to elaborate here that peace is
yeah.
established by threatening those who disturb the peace with certain violence.
I'm sorry, read that one more time, please.
Uh, that peace is established by threatening those who disturb the peace with violence.
Whew. Yeah, that is definitely a deep one. So I see pacifism in two ways: the principled way, and then the consequentialist way. The consequentialist would be, in reality, violence begets more violence. It creates more tension. I can't control others. What I can do is control myself. I'm not engaging in it whatsoever. There's also a difference between I'm not going to engage in violence and I'm not going to engage in defense. The difference being initiating violence against others or ever using defensive force. Now, if you advocate libertarianism, like myself, and you believe in the non aggression principle, to cave in to someone who is initiating aggression, initiating violence, initiating unjust physical interference, well, then you are justifying violence in the first place. So, in that sense, I do not think pacifism is justified. Now, to say that Brian Kaplan, for example, says our government should embrace pacifism, and by that I mean engage in a foreign policy not of war and sanctions, but in a foreign policy of trade and communication. That I am fully on board with, but not the philosophy of no matter how much they're shooting at you, don't shoot back, we will be rewarded in the next life. I believe that that is absolutely a joke. And it justifies the violence that they're doing. It's saying people who initiate violence don't deserve to be met with defensive force. I think that is totally illegitimate. Am I answering the question?
I mean, I think so. Bait, if you're in chat, you want to write in the discussion questions? I'm sorry, discussion. If you think that was adequately answered.
Yeah, definitely, definitely let me know. Yeah, passive as a tactic, I'm definitely curious about. There's a philosopher, Michael Humer, at the University of Boulder, Colorado, who said people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. had much more of an impact than had they physically resisted the state or done anything like that, because it allowed their message to be seen as legitimate in the eyes of the opposition or people who were not interested in the first place. So, as far as it being a tactic, I have not really done the hard research on the cost benefit analysis of pacifism, but what I gave you before of my answer about on principle, that is where I stand.
Okay, so Bait wrote, it's more of the idea that you should build up a large military to discourage others from attacking you.
Yeah, I would say that could be an empirical claim. So if we have a principle, the bigger the military, the less you need to use it. We would see the biggest militaries that have ever existed never engaging in violence or rarely engaging in violence. And we'd see small countries constantly at war with each other. I think the opposite is true. I think the bigger the governments, like the Soviet Union, the British Empire, the US Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Syrians, the Persians. I think the bigger the government, the bigger the military, the more constant justification that people say, well, we have this big hammer. Oh, look, that appears to be a nail. Let's use it there. Oh, yes, and look at that, another nail. When you're not bearing the cost, when all it is political expediency and someone else is flipping the bill, and you have every reason to believe you're not going to ever be held accountable in war crimes trials. I mean, very unlikely. I mean, how many civilians would a US president have to kill before, people said this guy needs to be impeached? I mean, they get real upset over a Ukrainian phone call or possible Russian meddling, but I mean, if you drop an almost nuke on Afghanistan, or you send 76 Tomahawks into Syria based on a false chlorine weapons scandal, or Bush Jr. started Bush Sr. started the Iraq War One based on a lie where a woman named Nyaria said, "Yeah, I was there. I saw the Iraqi army throw the babies in incubators, and threw them on the cold floor, and they died." Well, that is just someone who has a big military. And then that, of course, turned out to be a lie. She was the daughter of the U.S. Kuwaiti ambassador. So I think the bigger the military historically, the more justification state agents see as, oh, look, another problem. What can't be solved with more militarism spending? So it really helps a lot, and it hardly hurts. Um, so I'd say with the state, the bigger the military, the worse generally, and it creates more enemies. I think there's a lot of research showing that a lot of people hate countries that bomb your country, so to speak, speaking in collectivist terms. But for the sake of time, when one country constantly initiates aggression, a lot of civilians tend to not like the aggressing country. Um, so I'd say the bigger the military when dealing with the state, the worse. Now, say that we just had voluntarily funded armies, I actually don't know. So, for example, the right size of an industry or the right size of an organization, I feel like I'm gonna cower out and just say anything that they acquire voluntarily, I think is just. That is a just way to judge the size of something. I mean, Sears at one point, people wanted to be the biggest thing ever, and now people would rather have something else. So the size of an organization, whether it's a military or a charity or a business or a union, anything you can acquire voluntarily while being held to the same moral principles any other organization would be held to, I think is justified. As far as what is in game theory terms, the probability of you having a large organization that isn't going to draw in corrupt people, the Maos, the Kissingers, the Hitlers, the Pol Pots, I think the bigger the military, the worse. And the smaller the government military, the more likely you are to trade freely. But I am totally open to being wrong about that one.
Right. So I get your concern about a large military being rife for abuse, but I think what Bate was trying to get at was just the idea that if you don't have a large, and these are my words, not Bates. I'm trying to characterize what I think Bates getting at. If you don't have a large, centrally organized military, um, you kind of leave yourself open to the threat of attack. So this would point more towards, in I think it was 1940, the Nazi invasion of the Netherlands, which I think lasted like 6 hours, and Denmark, which lasted like 3 hours. And same for Belgium. Like, there were a lot of countries that were attacked, and they didn't have much of a military, and it was just a matter of hours before their entire country surrendered. I think they're pointing to stuff like that. You know, I guess, what would you say about the idea of a country having a large military to deter others from attacking them?
Sure. Yeah. Then that is a absolute hole in my theory, and that is just another reason why we need to make sure that we don't have a monopoly on who gets to provide defense. Because if someone is as ignorant as I or as evil as Nixon, well, then we're pretty much finished, or LBJ for that matter. So, as far as the Denmark cases, yeah, that is definitely an example. Also, big governments. I think the British Empire had like a fifth of the world under its control at the time, and it was constantly at war. It was being bombed in the Second World War. Um, so yeah, that is something I would definitely. Yeah, the Soviet Union had a lot of casualties. They were a really big militarist government when the Nazis invaded under Operation Barbarossa. U.S. government grew, started engaging in the Export Control Act of 1940. That initiated a conflict with the Japanese. A document called the McCullen Memo pretty much proves that it was a plan to provoke Japan.
Okay. So our next question comes from Alien Robot Ghost. It's two questions really. One, should we, given that we have a large military, should we use it to protect other countries? And two, is it moral to charge them a fee for that service?
You can GoFundMe for guerrillas. not a position that is business, that is not business. Well, from this, you person A are assaulting person B. You are person C, doesn't know either of them. You have the right to stop A from raping, murdering person B. Well, yes, I believe you do, even though it's not your business. Well, it becomes your business when such an immoral action is taking place. Well, now, what if A, B, and C, instead of individuals, are actually groups of 30 people? Principle is still the same. So I am actually totally on board with, with doing away with Saddam, doing away with Gaddafi and Assad and all these other people. But I do not trust the U.S. military and the Central Intelligence Agency and the FBI. So if the question is, well, given that we already have this military is justified in doing that, I'd say absolutely not. There's just been too many historical lies. There's been Gaddafi giving Viagra to his troops. There have been Iraq War II WMDs. There was the Taliban. You can read about this in George Bush's book Decision Points, a chapter titled Afghanistan. He said, yeah, they offered me bin Laden on a silver platter, and I didn't take it because I knew that that was not the way to negotiate. I was really trying to rally the troops. I mean, you have so much immorality. You have so much deception. You have such a lack of caring for civilians that this coercively funded military, I wouldn't trust them to tell me the time in a room full of clocks. So my answer to that is no. But would I support a voluntarily funded group of voluntarist veterans who are fed up with, dictators initiating violence? Well, of course, yeah. That I see as no different than, hey, we are a group of people who stop violent aggressors from initiating violence against peaceful citizens. That I see as legitimate.
Okay. So then our next question here comes from Kilas, just as preliminary. Are you familiar with the land reformation attempts going on recently in South Africa?
You know what? No, not the most up to date one. But if you give me a short summary, I'll give you my thoughts.
Okay, I can give a short summary, but someone's going to object to this characterization. But I think no matter how I characterize this is a contentious issue. Someone's going to object. But I think the fairest way to describe it is that a long time ago, so I think it was in the 40s or 50s, they started apartheid government where the white minorities basically ruled the country. The black majorities didn't even have a vote, as far as I understand. And before that, there was a colonial government, which was still heavily dominated by the whites. And during both of these periods, lands were sold to at cheap prices or given to whites to farm. And now they've had it for 6 to 8 decades. Aries-men, you mute yourself?
Hey,
Sorry about that. So yeah, now these farmers have had it for 6 to 8 decades, and the government's basically looking at it and saying, your ancestors originally acquired this unjustly, so we're going to take it and give it to other people. And in this case, they're giving it to black farmers trying to deal with racial inequalities.
Sure, yeah. I mean, so if I were to break that down mentally off the top of my head, I steal your computer and someone catches me. Do I have the right to, or should I be forced to give the computer back? Well, of course, if it was yours, you acquired it. Now, let's say you're chasing after me, you die in a car accident, but I'm caught later. Well, then, of course, I still owe it to your kids, your descendants. Now, let's say I give it to my great 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 grandkids, and then your great 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 grandkids finally catch up with mine and say, hey, that was our great 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 grandpa's. It is so difficult to draw a line when such an amount of violence has been done. But that's why I think we should get the most amount of competing ideas in this field to maybe come up with a beneficial process. I mean, sometimes when you're dealing with an atrocity, it's just so hard to go back and account for everything. I mean, how do you account for the invasion of Vietnam? Just a deception based on some Gulf of Tonkin lie, and then they drop more bombs on Vietnam than the entire European theater in the Second World War. What's the monetary amount on that? How much are the family members worth? So it's so difficult to do this that I think we just need as many voluntary competing ideas as possible. And I get that that's a non-answer, but that is pretty much so much, excuse me, of the philosophy. What should I do with my day? I don't know, anything voluntary. How do I find a wife and find happiness? I don't know, anything voluntary. So I can't say that I have an exact number of at what year it becomes the property of your descendants rather than the person who was done an injustice against. I will say that what the current South African government could do is say, violence is really bad. Look at that apartheid government. What we are going to do in response, because we cannot turn back time, is we are going to embrace a principle of nonviolence for all of South Africa. We can't unrape the women, we can't unkill those people, but what we can do from here on out is have a policy of freedom and voluntarism for all South Africans, yada, yada, yada. You got to move on. I mean, I hate to say that because it's sort of like, hey, anyone who commits a large-scale injustice, just give it 20 years and then you'll be off the hook, or 19 years or 18, whatever the number is. So I hate to say it, but God, at the same time, it's such a tool for division. I, a male, had my grandpa and his grandpa enslaved to fight in the First World War. And the Lusitania, according to the intimate papers of Colonel House, was based on a lie. Pearl Harbor was unjustified. Vietnam, my uncle was drafted into. Who was going to, give me the money that they would have earned had they lived and not had their arms blown off? That is so difficult to go back on that. I'd say the only thing we could do from here on out is recognize what was immoral about that, the violence, and try to do everything we can to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Okay, so significant change here, but the user, let me just see. Oh shoot, where was this question? Here it is. So Fox Terrier asks, what's your opinion on climate change? And if you believe it, how would an ANCAP society deal with it?
So let's say that the climate is changing as a causal result of human behavior. If it's changing, I have no clue what the temperature should be, whether hotter or colder, or that which it is right now is the perfect temperature and it shouldn't change. So what I would say is, if we want to live in a world where we don't have a lot of products and services emitting things that are bad for the environment, the kind of system I would want in place is one where there is so much freedom for us to have people who have innovative products that they're not competed out of the market through regulations. There's such a barrier to entry in starting a business. In anything you do might be categorized as violations of intellectual property, and you might be stopped from doing so. I'd make sure that we had a lot of competing schools and not a monopoly school organization where people could spend time and learn about how to make things more environmentally friendly. So if I want a cleaner environment, what I want is the most amount of freedom for people to find the cleanest ways to achieve things. So if we look at cars now, let's say cars are bad and they do bad things through, excuse me, through polluting the environment. Well, it certainly is an upgrade from older cars that got fewer miles to the gallon, which I believe is thanks to free trade with countries like Japan. And even if you look at those cars, it's an improvement from the, excuse being graphic, but the horse manure that would be all over the streets when you had horses and buggies. That too, I think, would be bad for the environment, probably worse, more likely to get prone to disease, get rat-infested streets. Things would be horrible then too. So it's more about trade-offs. I would definitely look more into the work of, or something I plan on doing is more into the work of people like Nikola Tesla, who were able to generate energy in such ways that at very small amounts negative consequences, or what would be generally referred to as externalities. I don't believe the existence of a state or one group that has the right to rule uh, hundreds of billions of hundreds of millions of strangers is the solution to climate catastrophe. Let's say it is. Say people are a direct cause. Does that mean government has the answer? Does that mean the state knows what to do? It would be the equivalent of bad climate change is happening. Therefore, the Koch brothers need a strong hold over the economy and need to tell the products and services we are allowed to use. And they can get General Electric on board with them. Well, that doesn't answer the objection. It's like saying bad's happening to kids. Let the Catholic Church and the Boy Scouts in charge. Well, that doesn't solve the issue. If anything, it could exacerbate the issue. I definitely see, especially having dealt with the FCC. I haven't necessarily dealt with environmental regulations that much in the EPA, but I have friends in other businesses, and I can tell you the FCC has created so much of a hurdle to me getting products and services to consumers. That's all I want. I just want to make money, want to deal with people voluntarily, want to give people products and services that make their lives better. But it's this constant, oh, FCC says that's not allowed. Or I'm just worried that the regulatory agencies like OSHA are going to shut me down or something. So I do about, I'd say, 1/4 of what I would do in the absence of those things. And that's fewer ideas. That's fewer opportunities for us to have cleaner options. So that is my answer to climate change, or my non-answer with giving myself some wiggle room. I'd say governments are huge polluters. I mean, if you look at what militaries do, governments have very little incentive. Even if they were the kindest people on the planet, the governments have the intellectual capacity or the incentive to create cleaner products. I mean, as kind as populous as I'm sure the people in Bangladesh are, places in areas of that don't have resources to make things clean. Like in places, and I don't think there are evil people there, and that's why they're using dirty stuff. But I think if we had more free trade, more voluntary options, more ability to start businesses overseas, then we would see a cleaner environment overall.
Okay. Next question. Jeff asks, are you more, let's see, yeah, are you more on the side of Hans Hermann Hoppe when it comes to protecting libertarian culture and values, or would you generally let people do what they want as long as they're peaceful? Now, in answering that, would you mind, because I'm sure most people don't have any clue what Hoppe's position is on this, would you mind describing that if you're familiar with it?
Yeah, so Hans Hoppe wrote a section of his book, Democracy, the God That Failed, on immigration, saying that, in short, individuals own themselves. With regard to others, they have a better claim to property they acquire through voluntary exchange or original appropriation. If that property is stolen from them by a group of people, let's call this group of people government, then that government should be stewards of that property from those who the money was confiscated from. They shouldn't allow free, open immigration and universal access to the scarce resources of land in this case. I don't. The reason I don't agree with that is I just look at what am I justified in doing, and if I'm not justified, then I can't say, well, I therefore believe the police are justified in doing it. So we have one case where you allow people to migrate freely, and you can do a billion other things. You can make sure libertarians, and he said in one of his speeches he believes that whites who are disproportionate, that libertarianism, which is disproportionately white, means we need to, in the same way Mexicans appreciate Mexican culture, blacks and Jews appreciate themselves, then whites should engage in the same sort of preference. Nothing terrible about that, so long as it's peaceful. It's like caring more for your family than others. Doesn't mean you're oppressing the families of others. So I would say that anything voluntary that you can do to promote your culture. I don't really know how culture spreads. I don't know if it's through books, if it's through propaganda, if it's through videos, if it's through word of mouth, if it's through having babies. All of those things can be done voluntarily. What I don't see a legitimate response to is initiate. It does look like initiating violence when someone goes to cross a border. I can't say that the state has a better claim to that border than the person. Now, let's say it's a state school or a state hospital or anything else that the state has. Well, then who owns that? Therein lies the issue where we have a group of people who we have different moral standards for. We don't know who owns it because everything they have, they've taken violently. And what we need to recognize in this whole thing is there's an organization violently taking property and then worrying about who has access to it. The problem is them taking it in the first place. So I'd say, much like the South African example, it's so hard to say what immigrants can do what where. He says, well, that they tend to be net drains on society, which means there are larger taxes and more regulations in the future. Well, that applies to a lot of Americans. Would I feel justified in forcibly deporting a lot of them? I think a lot of the way ICE treats people, from what I've seen, and of course it's very selective, I believe their treatment's unjust. Also, there's a utilitarian consequentialist view of, should we give the state a bunch of power to forcibly keep people out? Can it be used to also keep us in? Are they only going to keep out the undesirables with all this power? Do they pinky promise? And then again, there's, well, if we have a bunch of people who don't recognize property rights in the first place, well, at what point is it an invasion? So that again is so difficult to deal with a temporary solution. What I say to the Hoppians is, and I really like a lot of his other stuff, but on this I do not agree, because I would not feel justified in forcibly stopping someone from migrating. I see it as a totally peaceful act. What I say to them is, there are so many voluntary ways to keep your culture, the Western culture. Engage in Socratic questioning. Always be classy. I mean, whatever your ideal of what the West should be, you can always be that all the time. There's a million voluntary ways to do it. But when they say, I want to protect the West, use violence against the immigrants, that seems like a bit of a scapegoat. Because if your group is becoming a minority, you're already starting to look at, who do we point the finger to? Well, the Jews engage in in-group preference and are bringing in third worlders to lower white birth rates, and they're promoting feminism, and the blacks are committing crime. Well, that is just a cop-out from embracing the non-aggression principle and saying, here's what I want, here's my culture. Here are the 50 things I'm going to do voluntarily to promote my culture. Look, a lot of a lot of Middle Eastern countries have a hatred for America. And, oh gosh, referring to America as the great Satan, saying, we don't want American culture here, because they think American culture will win out. Now, let's say that you have a system where, I'm trying to think of, nothing's really coming to me. So, say that you have the rapes in Cologne, Germany, or the terrible rapes that are happening in Sweden with migrants. They're referred to as rape refugees because so many of the gang rapists are Pakistani. That is such a blatant violation of aggression that you would be justified, I think, in killing all of those people, as I would to any rapist. So that is a way of responding to violence without initiating violence against millions of strangers, because a small portion of them are doing immoral things. There's a ton of defensive ways of stopping violent migration. There's a ton of peaceful ways to promote your own culture. Can't be using the immigrants as a scapegoat. I think it's unjustified.
Okay. Let's see. Next question here. I'll take one from Jordan Phillips. He asks, thoughts on how abortion should be handled.
Yeah, this is this again is a great one. First things first, if people don't want to fund Planned Parenthood, got to have the ability to opt out of it. So as far as getting people, neck and neck fighting with each other about something, when people have the ability to opt out, they tend to really settle down about things. Now, I have seen quite a number of videos that have made me go from eating meat is totally okay, it's no different than plants, to, oh my God, those animals are really being mistreated, this might not be okay. In the same way, I've seen some abortion videos that made me think, that appears to be murder. If it was out of the stomach, I guess it would be. So if we have a baby that is born early, we do everything to save the baby. If there's another baby who the mother wants to abort for whatever reason, and that baby is not saved, that does not seem like a morally justified way of approaching these things. Where one baby gets saved just because the mother wants to, the other does not get saved and is aborted because the mother wants it to. I don't think human life is subjective in that way, based on whatever your parents think. I am pro-choice in pretty much everything, but this I don't believe you are justified in aborting a child. That is why I am fully on board with there being no IP laws in contraception. This way, it's more likely to people are more likely to have access to it. People are more likely to use it when there is more of a free market and it's more readily available in places. Could maybe order it off Amazon or something. I don't think that I would feel justified, assuming I knew how to do the medical procedure. I don't think I would be justified in performing one after watching some abortion doctors who have become pro-life after years of doing the procedure. Then again, at what point does it go from a clump of cells to a baby? Of course, in the examples that we often see with pro-lifers, it is so obviously a baby that is being taken apart in the second or third trimester that I have to say is murder, unless the actions of the baby or the positioning is killing the mother. That's just infanticide. As far as first term, I gotta say, that's a cop out. I'm sorry. I am saying that I think that that is still a life and should be justly treated as one. So, my principled position is no, you do not have the right to abort unless it is in direct threat to the life of the mother. And my utilitarian consequentialist, how do we deal with this in reality, is make sure there's a market as free as possible so we can get contraception to people who do not want to have babies in the first place.
Okay, our next question comes from Reject Tradition. He asks, how would an ANCAP society protect minority rights if the majority were to try to infringe on them?
So this again is a case of how would a certain society do something? I really have no clue. I mean, how many societies have existed throughout all of the world? How many of them have I studied? Very few. If it is an anarcho-capitalist society, that means it recognizes the legitimacy of the non-aggression principle. If it is a democracy society, that means they recognize the legitimacy of democracy. If it's a republic, et cetera, et cetera. So if I am in a minority that generally against me, automatically ruled out, democracy will be outvoted, and probably can be and say that action they're not be there. I would say it's best for I would also say we're much more likely to use violence against minorities when there's a state constantly playing one group off against another. I would also say that when the state has different moral standards, it's easier to say, yeah, we should do away with those people when you actually don't feel the moral repercussions, when you have no skin in the game, when you're not directly involved. What you're really saying is this entity to which different morality exists, they should have the right to, by whatever means necessary, suppress this group. Now, say you have a non-governmental organization. Let's say you have the Charlottesville people. Well, I would also consider the Klan a non-governmental group, sort of. Had a lot of FBI agents. About 1 in every 5 Klansmen were FBI agents according to the COINTELPRO papers, counterintelligence program. And also, they were intentionally used as a strong arm of the Democratic Party when they initially became as popular as they did under Woodrow Wilson. So, and they had that March on Washington. So these are very often extensions of the state. The reason being is because if I'm someone, say I'm someone who believes in white pride and white power, anything the government does on behalf of blacks, well, that negatively affects me. Now I have to deal with that. And anything that I do, well, then the blacks have to deal with. So instead of us having an agency where we can violently impose on others and force other groups to force what we want, you get into this, cat and mouse game of I'm only using violence because if I don't, this other group will take power of the ring and they'll get to use it against me. So we're really acting defensively here. So that is there. Those are a number of examples in which the state perpetuates immorality towards minorities, constantly using them as scapegoats. Of course, if a minority is successful, well, they're exploiting the rest of us. If a minority is not successful, well, they're a drain on society, and they need to be, constantly bashed at every turn by politicians and whatnot. So if I'm just thinking of it, if I am a minority, what I want to be in is a society that recognizes the non-aggression principle and private property rights. That is my position on it.
Okay. I am not sure what's meant by this. Maybe you would. This user asks, would it be better to be a voluntarist capitalist instead of an anarchist capitalist?
Yeah, so the term voluntarist, meaning all interactions should be between consenting adults, should be voluntary, and anarchist, meaning without, and archon, rulers without rulers, or without the right to coercively initiate violence over someone, claiming a greater, um, posing a greater claim to their life than they themselves. So I think the terms are interchangeable. I think anarchist, voluntarist, capitalist, I actually think all of those terms are interchangeable, even though they're not generally used so. All three of those terms say the individual, there's no person or group of person that has the right to initiate violence against a person or group of persons who are acting peacefully. That is what I get from all three of those terms when you really try to define them. I would say, as far as marketing, maybe voluntarist or voluntarist free market or anarcho-libertarian or libertarian voluntarist. Maybe that is the best way to go about it. But to answer the question of anarcho-capitalist or voluntarist capitalist, I see no principled difference. I just see a lot of stigma tied to the name anarchist because originally it was a number of communists advocating the abolition of the state. Trotsky wrote Communism and Terrorism, in which you would really get a sense of anarchy being associated with chaos there. So it's hard to, revive that term from the dead when it has such a negative connotation in the same way the term capitalist does. So what I try to do on my channel is really get at the foundational principles. So even if I call something McCarthyism or capitalism or socialism, you're not necessarily scared of the term if you have an understanding of it. So that's what I try to do. I try to develop an understanding and a philosophy behind these terms. This way, they're not just scary mind control words like, oh, what you did there is terrorism. What that person did is government. I'm against this because of socialism or whatever they think. I had a moron say to me that free trade with Canada means we'd be embracing socialism. That for the state to initiate violence against peaceful people for trading, that's the right thing to do, that's a capitalist thing to do. When any sane person would see that is obviously the state interfering in what would otherwise be a voluntary transaction. So I really try to get down to the meaning of these words. And so I'm really not sure which one would be better marketing. I would say that I'm all three: an anarchist, a voluntarist, and a capitalist, and a libertarian.
Okay. But of those, is there one that you prefer?
I would say the term libertarian, even though it's. I had someone talk to me once about research in a word that has a lot of syllables tends to be, people are likely to take seriously or embrace. But I would say that libertarian applies to me mostly because it embraces the non-aggression principle and self-ownership. the other side of that, by definition, is private property. Um, so I would say libertarian is the closest that I would categorize myself as.
Okay. So next question is from Chargebug. He asks, how will a country be able to successfully transition into anarcho-capitalism from our current system?
Yeah, there's a lot of competing theories about, well, what's going to happen is there's going to be a big fight, or government's going to get smaller, and then smaller, and then smaller, and then it's going to be. I actually don't see it like that at all. What I just see is it's going to be so gradual that we're not even going to recognize that it is happening, because all it entails is not, well, in order to have anarchy, we need to get rid of the Pentagon building, Washington Monument, and White House, and then sell to a private bidder. Well, that does nothing to what statism is. Statism is two things: the belief by the populace and the politicians and its enforcers. So it's the people in the state and belief in the mind of the subject. So when you recognize that is the issue, or so I claim, that is the issue in the world, what the only solution to that, the remedy, is for the populace to recognize them as having no more rights than any other or group of persons. So when that slow, gradual thing happens, I really have no clue how that's going to look, or what it's going to entail. But I think the best way is to communicate the message in such a way that, I guess you could think of it as, imagine explaining democracy to someone in the monarchy days. It kind of sounds crazy. I mean, or imagine trying to get someone to embrace monarchy in today's democratic days, where people see democracy as legitimate. It is quite far off. So we really have no. Would you have guessed democracy would look like, Trump running against Hillary and a woman pretending to be a Native American in the days of King George? Well, what's democracy going to look like? Well, there's going to be a guy who writes The Art of the Deal, and then he's going to become a politician, and then Epstein's not going to kill himself. I mean, you have no clue how billions of people are going to interact. So I think it's going to be much more of a slow realization of, hey, that group's actions are just as immoral, and you might get some resistance, or you might get some people to stop enforcing laws. When the police eventually realize that legislation or the laws they enforce are just words written down by known lying politicians who, by every measure, are totally corrupt, bought and paid for, I think they're going to start settling down, or they'll intensify, or the cognitive dissonance will kick in. I really don't know. My guess is eventually people will start holding the state to the same standards they would any other organization. The state will slowly lose its power hold. They'll commit a couple atrocities. The people won't buy it, and the state agents will find it more profitable to be in the private sector producing voluntary goods. I mean, if you are a psychopath, and let's say we have them in every society, I would just want to make sure that there's a free market where, in order to make money or have power, you have to meet consumer demand. Like Carnegie, Rockefeller, Ford, Vanderbilt. I think those guys were pretty much absolute jerks the more I read about their personal lives. But in order for them to get any sense of power in the real world, they had to, lower the price of steel dramatically, increase people's ability to ride on trains, increase people's access to the steam engine, give people access to cars and oil. So if we have all these evil psychopaths, what we want to say is, hey, we recognize the legitimacy of a free market. If you want money and power, go there. You don't get any extra rights, but we don't recognize the right of people to rule over others. That's totally immoral. So I think it can definitely happen, and I think they'll that state agents, the Kissingers of the world, so to speak, will also see it as profitable to go into private endeavors, and it'll just be so ridiculous. I mean, it'll be me walking outside, putting a crown on my head, and saying, "I, as king of the country, I hear I'm king of the street. Pay me money. people would just laugh and say, "Oh, this poor guy is crazy. Maybe we should just give him some money." It would be the same thing as, Donald Trump saying, "I've made an executive order," and people just looking at him and laughing and saying, "You wrote words down on paper. Okay, what? Oh, you want us to invade Iran? You want us to bomb Syria? You want us to do A, B, and C to whatever Middle Eastern country we didn't care about 5 minutes ago?" No. There's some psycho who believes he has authority. So I think the win will be when people see presidents and politicians and police officers no different than they would me if I went around with a badge demanding things, or I went around with a crown demanding people obey my edicts.
Okay. So our next question comes from Chainsaw Guy. He asks, when it comes to higher education, do you agree with the idea that all student loan debt should be forgiven? And if not, how do you propose individuals can pay it off without crippling themselves with bills?
Yeah, student loan debt, and I'd say any debt owned by Sally Mae or any federal agency, people have no obligation to pay back. That absolutely should be done away with. On the other hand, I mean, it's just an illegitimate transaction. I stole money from Bill and gave it to Jack. Now, Jack, you owe me tons of money, Jack, because of what I paid for. Well, I didn't acquire the money justly in the first place. So, if anything, I owe the money to Bill. So, that is another case of how do we get property back to the just owners. I don't think the only reason that I'm afraid of that quote unquote solution, when there's no solutions, there's only trade offs. I'm afraid of that because in the same way, when government is so quick and easy with giving people housing mortgages through Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, um, federal housing, urban development, um, Community Reinvestment Act, what happens is the price of houses absolutely skyrocket and there's a crash. Same thing is happening with college loans. Anyone who wants a house can get a house, housing collapse. Anyone who wants a college degree, regardless of your metrics, you can take out, $100,000, even though you're probably going to party, you're not going to graduate, and do whatever, get a gender studies degree or lesbian dance theory. Of course, the joke goes. Um, I see a bubble being created if there is student loan forgiveness. And then it wouldn't get us to the heart of the problem. That's another reason why I'm not like, oh, I really hope this happens, because it would just send a signal to, if debt gets big enough, governments will forgive it. Same thing. I didn't support the Troubled Asset Relief Package, TARP, in bailing out businesses. It creates a moral hazard. It incentivizes long-term bad behavior. As far as hurting the individuals, you know, I remember I think I was like 17 in high school when we had, colleges come to us and starting to say, start doing well junior and senior year because you got to start picking out colleges. I will say that is very, very manipulative, getting kids to sign on to hundreds and thousands of dollars of loans. In the same way, they just don't have the ability to mentally grasp it. If it is from a voluntary vendor, though, like a bank, Bank of America or Wells Fargo or a credit union, especially, um, then I still see that those organizations have a better claim to the money than the person who chose to take out the loan. If anything, it could be a good disciplinary lesson for you. As far as not hurting the people who took out the loans, yeah, I think it would be a hard lesson to learn. I think I'm at like $6,000, and then I'm and then I'm done. So I still got quite a bit to go, and I dropped out of Arizona State, Grand Canyon University, and Chandler Gilbert Community College. So I mean, it's not exactly like I cashed out and got a bunch of extra money to throw at student loans. As far as it not hurting the individuals, I don't know. I really don't know. I would say instead of allocating time towards electing politicians and getting the right people to forgive our student debt, which is only going to increase the bubble because it's not getting at the heart of the issue. The heart of the issue is the state is backing college loans, making them more expensive than they otherwise would be. And people automatically believe they have to go to college because they haven't gotten a good state education. After 12 years, they still need 4 more years of school. So the solution long term is more self-reliance, more personal education. In other words, the people in your life, make sure they have anything that you believe in your intellectual capacity you could help them with, as far as furthering their professional well-being, making sure they're educated. Amazon giving us access to more and more books. YouTube, BitChute, archive.org giving us access to more videos to educate ourselves. So the long-term solution is not in how do we get the state to justify stopping loans they've already inflated, just like they did the housing bubble with Fannie and Freddie. The solution is not seeing college as the solution unless you are in a STEM field: science, technology, engineering, or mathematics. That is the best answer I could come up with on short notice. But hey, man, if the state says you owe them money, I can't see that is legitimate. The average person has a better claim to their money than the coercively funded, mass murdering, mass kidnapping government does.
So I just want to follow up to kind of clarify. Let's just start here. It sounded like you were saying that student loan debt owed to the federal government isn't legitimate, and there really is no obligation or moral obligation, or at least there should not be a moral obligation to repay it, because it was stolen in the first place. Is that correct?
Correct.
So wouldn't, in this case, the government be a pass-through entity that you would basically pay back money to the government and they would redistribute it? Wouldn't that be the right way rather than, just not paying it?
I'm sorry. What was the first part of your statement?
Sorry, I wasn't phrasing this well. What I'm trying to get at is, why would you not want the government to take that money back that was loaned and then repay it instead of just canceling the debt?
Oh, I would not want the state to take the money back at all. I would want them to not to recognize they have no right to collect on it because they had no right to make the loan in the first place. But my what I was trying to add on to that is that is not a solution, because it's just going to increase the college bubble more than it otherwise would have. I mean, the price of a quote education is so much more than it otherwise would be if there were just voluntary actors instead of the state guaranteeing these loans and giving them to more people. And now the degrees are even becoming worth less than they otherwise would be because so many people have them. Yeah, everyone's got a college degree. What sets you apart? Oh, well, now you have to have super duper college or a master's or a doctor's now to set yourself apart. So we're belittling the value of each degree the more we give out.
Okay. Let's see here. So this next question is going to come from, yes, there he is, from Reject Tradition about climate change. You want to go ahead?
Sure.
Oh no, Reject, are you able to speak? This is weird. Okay, we got a little bit technical issues to get this worked out in a second here. In the meantime, we'll use a question from Alien Robot Ghost. He asks, do you think that generational wealth can grow too much?
Yeah. As far as generational wealth, the statistics that I got from the New York Times in an article titled Millionaire Next Door, 80% of millionaires are first generation. It would be far higher if we didn't have intellectual property and we had fewer regulations that allowed for more competition and fewer oligopolies, which are the result of people not being able to jump the regulatory hurdles larger companies have the financial resources and lawyers to deal with. As far as too big, knowing what the right size is really hard. I mean, let's say a company has $1 trillion. Well, what are they doing with the $1 trillion? Is it in banks being lent out to organizations who are building 100,000 homes a year, giving people houses? Are they employing 1 million other people and feeding families? So to know an exact number of, yeah, eventually that's too much, I don't really see that because I just see there's always potential benefits and potential costs to one group having a lot of power. I mean, Amazon and Walmart, often the villains and things like this, they have done so much to give employment opportunities to people with very low skills to get their foot in the door. Amazon has done a lot for small business and giving them a place to sell in the competing markets. I constantly buy things from used bookstores out of state through Amazon and Goodwills in other states in America because Amazon gives them a platform. So I don't necessarily see it as a zero sum game. At this point, you're doing immoral stuff, and the amount of wealth you have is just so much that now a state is legitimate in taxing you, or any group has the right to take 5% of your income annually. I don't. My answer is no, because the existence of wealth does not necessarily exclude others, and it has the ability to create more wealth within a society. The more wealth you have, the more you can invest, the more stuff you can build, the more beautiful you can make cities. But the opposite of that coin is, or you could make cities look like trash. That is also a possibility. That is something that happens when people are free to spend their money the way they want. It also happens when people aren't free and the state monopolizes the currency and forces people to fund nonsense and garbage. So my answer is anything that you acquire through voluntary association or contract is legitimate. And I don't see a point of diminishing return on that.
Okay, our next question is in regards to climate change, and it comes from Reject Tradition. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I would ask, what do you say about capitalism's current inadequacy in dealing with climate change, and how would a anarcho-capitalist society deal with this?
How long have you been listening? Did I not answer that in my first response to climate change?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought Reject, you had a follow-up on that.
Well, that was my question. I don't know if you answered this already or answered something tangentially to it, but would you say that capitalism is doing a good job, like, answering climate change right now?
Yes. As far as do we have what system would give us the most amount of products to increase the likelihood that we have a clean environment? I think absolutely a free market where there are not hurdles to regulation. I think the existence of a large regulatory state or the state controlling the factors of production does not make the environment cleaner than it otherwise would be. I believe large states stifle innovation. While pollution certainly does exist, the example I used earlier of, well, what happened before that and what is the trade-off? Yes, there's a little pollution, but we can communicate with people across the planet, etc., etc. I also mentioned I don't know what the right degree should be of the world. I don't know what the climate should be. The only thing I am advocating is that we make sure that we have a system in which people with the best ideas, a microscopic amount of people, are going to build environmentally friendly products and services. What I want is a world where those people have the least amount of hurdles to getting their products to the populace, and there's a constant incentive. That's why I think we see, let's take cell phones, for example. Gordon Gekko, the richest man in the 1980s in the Wall Street movie, has a big brick up to his ear, and that uses so much copper, so much metal, so many resources. Now, people have phones that are much more efficient, and that's because of free trade. That is a causal result of private property from what the studies that I've done do. The first computer I heard was like as big as a room in IBM. Now the average computer takes up much less. So there is an incentive with private property, with free market capitalism, to use fewer resources and still meet consumer demand, because you have competitors who are using more resources. If you use resources more efficiently, then you are going to make more money than you otherwise would. So that is my general answer to climate change or global warming or whatever they have moved the goalpost to today.
So, pollution of like animals and such like that, is not the same as pollution from cars or from industry. Industry produces like things that increase the CO2 in our atmosphere and is like actively destroying our Earth. So what is the solution to that? Because even if we have like interconnectivity between nations and all these high-tech things, that doesn't mean that we can't move towards green energy and promote green energy.
I am 100% on board with clean energy. I just want anything to be funded to be voluntary. I'm totally on board with going 100% green, eating 100% vegan, doing whatever, so long as it's done peacefully without one group of people violently dominating others. And of course, it's not just, do they know what to do? Does the state know how to solve it? It's just so obviously a lie. I don't want to say climate change is a lie. I want to say it's so convenient on their end to say, hey, look, big bad thing exists. Therefore, we should have a bunch of power. Look, the terrorists are here. Give us power. The immigrants are coming. Give the state power. The environment is bad. Give us power. People are uneducated. Give the state more power. Everything. What is the likelihood that all of these solutions are solved, so to speak, by giving one group of people more tax dollars? There is no way that is the best long-term solution, so to speak, for achieving these things. But yeah, I'm all for green energy. I'm for going green, living off the earth, recycling, doing whatever you can. Minimalism, I think, is great. I think minimalism is going to solve homelessness. I saw that they're making houses for $10,000. They'll be available by like 2025. I'm fully on board with greenism, environmentalism. I just don't believe we should sacrifice voluntarism for the sake of environmentalism.
Okay, but what is stopping companies like large corporations, like oil conglomerates, from using their resources and money that they created over time from trading in this free market to overtake the whims of the free market and pretty much hijack capitalism for their own needs? This can happen with or without a state.
Sure. And the best thing that would be stopping them is consumer choice. Consumers valuing other products and services more than products and services that use oil and gas.
Okay, so we're going to move on to a next question here. Don't want to go too long on one thing. There will be time to time, by the way, Keith, users that might want to go on longer with a one-on-one debate or something like that. If you're interested in, I guess, suppose like a mini debate here, just let me know. I'm just assuming we're sticking with a rough kind of question and answer format here generally. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, if we could be done by 7 my time, which is in 30 minutes, that would work best for me. I'm
Okay.
really enjoying this, and I hope that I was answering that gentleman's question. Anyone who wants to go on longer, you can get a hold of me on Twitter at @an_capitalist to further the communication outside of this. But yeah, I'm only good for another half hour or so.
Okay, so we want to get a few different questions in here. So, let me see. David asks, how should moral baselines be established in society in regard to disagreements on what constitutes consent or coercion, especially in regards to individuals using force against one another based on these disagreements?
Yeah, getting down that is an excellent point. At what point am I initiating violence against you? If I punch you in the face 100 times, obviously. What if I pat you on the back? Well, of course not. All right. At what point is it violence? Gosh, it's so hard. Maybe the moment you give me a bad look or the moment you say stop. What if you're in a coma and you can't say stop? At what point is force excessive? If you steal a penny from me, can I shoot you? No, but what if you're stealing $1,000? Can I punch you? Finding these equilibriums are so difficult, and that is just another reason why it's so dangerous to have a monopoly, coercively funded court system. And you need court systems that are willing to build their reputations, recognizing that, hey, if we don't provide just verdicts, well, people are going to stop associating with us. We'll have bad reputations. States, of course, don't fear that at all because they have coercively funded monopolies in such an area. So that is my weasel answer to that, is I actually don't know. I really like philosophers like Michael Huemer and Jason Brennan, who try to, narrow down, like, all right, here's an example of when defensive force is justified. Here's where it's unjustified. What is the principle baseline? That is an excellent question, and one that I would be happy to read more on. My general response to a lot of these is, hey, these are excellent points. Do you want green energy? Yeah, of course. I just want freedom on top of it. So I would say, in order to refute any of the ideas that I am putting forward, you would have to, one, I'm just trying to get at the base of or the heart of a lot of these questions. The anarcho-capitalist position can be refuted on two grounds. I would say, one, you would have to justify the existence of the moral justification of institutionalized violence. So it's not enough to say, can I steal 1 grain of bread to feed 1,000 people? Well, sure. But what you have to justify when justifying the existence of a state is why one group, that group called the government group, gets a monopoly on said violence. It would be the equivalent of me saying, is it okay to steal bread if I'm starving? Well, yes. Aha. I therefore have the right to take 10% of your income every year. I also have the right to force you to fund things that you're against, and I can cage you for victimless crimes and kill hundreds of thousands of civilians overseas annually. Well, that's obviously a non sequitur. So my general attempt to falsify the philosophy that I'm trying to promote is, step one, explain why institutionalized violence is justified on a large scale against millions of strangers. And number two, explain why this group, the Congress group in America, has a monopoly on that right. If it's just something that's totally legitimate, then every organization should be able to engage in it. So, yeah, as far as the baseline for when is it force, when is it coercion, the moment, I'm just thinking out loud here, the moment at which you stop consenting, the moment at which you, the aggressor is engaged in unwanted interference from the equilibrium of the owner of the property, of the owner of the body. In other words, you can have, some food in my fridge, but you can't take my whole house. I guess at some point, if I'm the property owner, I can decide for myself. I'm not really sure. Just another reason we need more competition in this field.
Okay. Next question is going to be in voice from Fox Terrier about incarceration in the U.S.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Fox.
Okay. So my question is, what is your opinion on the current state of prisoners and prisons in the United States? And if you believe there's an issue with the prison system, what are your suggestions to fix such issue that you identify?
Yes, I do see a few issues. One issue, it is coercively funded. People who do not like the system do not have the ability to opt out of funding it. That allocates energy and resources towards undesirable things. This, in turn, creates an incentive for people to produce products that very few others value. The percentage of Americans that really, really want to cage millions of people for truancy laws, tax evasion, or people using drugs or child support or something like that is microscopically small. So yes, my main issue is that the prison system does not recognize that violence is at the root of all crime or all unjust interaction. They believe that someone is justifiably imprisoned if they violate a law written down by politicians, even if it was written in 1913 and signed off by Woodrow Wilson or by Richard Nixon. These zombie laws, as I refer to them, written by people, hundreds of years ago, in which no theory of the state could you really impose those laws. Well, you consented to it because you voted for those people. Okay, literally no one voted for the Federal Reserve. So to cage someone for counterfeiting on what's called Bitcoin or the Liberty Dollar or anything else is obviously illegitimate. But then, of course, just because you don't consent to it doesn't mean that you can't be imprisoned for it. For example, I've never consented to not murdering or not stealing or not kidnapping, but that is also irrelevant. I should be caged or shot if I engage in any of those activities. My main issue with the prison system is there is not a principled justification for when it is okay to put someone in a cage for doing whatever they do. So that's why I believe we have an I don't know if even if it's an over incarceration rate or a miss incarceration rate. There are a lot of mobsters and cops and judges and politicians and soldiers who belong in jail. There's also a lot of peaceful people in jail who shouldn't be there. So, again, I'm going to take the ANCAP cop out and say I don't necessarily have the solution because I don't think there is a solution. I think there are only trade-offs, meaning that the best solution to this is make sure you only have voluntary funding and we have as many free competing ideas in this arena as possible. What you would also have in more of a private law society is focus on prevention rather than how do we get back at people. So if someone commits murder against a family member of mine, well, them going to jail, yeah, it's sort of like this revenge satisfying kind of primitive thing. But then again, how does that help anyone else? How does that help the victim? How does that make the wrong right again? You'll see that governments have a very big incentive to come after you if you have, not paid a parking ticket or something. But if someone steals from you, government's not going to spend many resources going after that person to make sure they've done you right. Which, of course, again, you'd expect from a coercively funded monopoly not caring about customers. What are you going to do? Move to Antarctica? That's what I thought. So that is my general answer on incarceration. I do not think the system is justified because there is no principle on which they put people in jail in the first place. There's just taking orders by politicians.
Sweet, thank you.
All right. So next question comes from Jordan. He wants to know what your thoughts are on Ayn Rand's objectivism.
I just published a video the other day, and I think I titled it, he should check out the video I did with Patrick McFarlane. It said, Ayn Rand's objections to anarchism debunked, is what I ended up titling it. You can find it on that link that probably Tim just put in the chat there. Uploaded it the other day. Ayn Rand on net, much like the Alex Jones question from earlier, I think is an absolute net benefit to the philosophy of freedom, of individualism, of recognizing that individuals have inherent worth. On the Phil Donahue show, she said, to summarize my point of view is that no one should initiate force against another person. That's her whole, because when you use force, you stop other individuals from being able to use their reason and live their life in according to their values. Now, let's say my values involve murdering a bunch of innocent people. Well, that violates the Randian principle of human self-ownership. I can do anything in the world I please, as long as I don't initiate force against peaceful people. The problem is that she did not also apply this principle to the state. As you can see in the video I mentioned, I quote from a book called Objectivism A to Z, in which she literally says the state has a right to monopolize guns. And a lot of Randians believe that when done in the name of foreign policy, murder is not murder when the state does it. If it's in Iran or Iraq or Afghanistan, they'll often refer to these wars as useless or stupid or not in America's interest, or referring to the Palestinians as savages. It's just incredible that you can have such a philosophy and then not apply it consistently at all in one of the most vital ways possible. I mean, imagine like Albert Einstein being on record saying 2 + 2 is 11, but all the other stuff, E = mc squared, and all that other stuff being terrific. But he had this bizarre notion that 2 + 2 = 11. That is how sort of I see Randians. I have never read her fiction work, but I have read The Virtue of Selfishness and, oh God, what's the other name of that book? I think it's called Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. Those are a series of essays She believed in intellectual property. I disagree with that. I also think that she would intentionally use the word selfishness to sort of beat people over the head with, hey, let me get you to respond in a hostile way, and then I could make you look like an idiot by really explaining where I come from, because she could have used any other list of words. Or maybe it's because she spoke Russian. Either way, I think the feminist movement, for any genuine feminists out there, should see Ayn Rand as an example of a woman who came from the Soviet state, collectivizing her father's business, came to a country, didn't speak the language, took a low-paying job, and wrote The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, and developed her own philosophy in a second language, all in one lifetime. This should be the feminist icon.
Okay, so there's a couple of questions, pretty general, just hot topics I want to get your views on. Do finish out here. Just first, again, for anyone, if you look in announcements, we've got, I just linked his YouTube channel and his Twitter account. And again, the Twitter handle is AN_capitalist. And if you guys want to invite your friends here, the link is discord.gg/bluepolitics. So one of the big hot topics is automation. It's been the driving force behind Andrew Yang's entire political campaign, I think. What are your thoughts about this idea that there's an impending crisis with automation?
Well, if you look at America historically, I think it was in the 1700s, about 80% of people were employed through agriculture, and now it is 2%. Now, imagine saying to someone at that time that only 2% of people are going to be employed in agriculture. The economy is changing rapidly. There is innovation in the agriculture industry. I bet 0 out of the millions of people would have guessed iPhones, computers, service industry, waiters, bookmakers, telemarketers, or anything like that. So again, I just got to be the broken record of, I have no clue what the future holds. I just think that any solution we should recognize as, all right, let's do this peacefully, and let's make sure that people have enough food, people have water, people have homes, people can live with dignity. We're not hurting the environment, but we cannot go astray from initiating violence against peaceful people. I mean, look at all the great things in your life that you value. How do I get a job that's fulfilling? How do I become happy in life? How do I find, a spouse and have kids and save for retirement? I don't know. And I'd be lying to you if I said, here's how you should do it and here's how it would work in the absence of a state. All I really know is that it should be done in the absence of a coercively funded monopoly, claiming rights no other organization has. So I tend to think that this is just me. This is not a libertarian position. I think the more innovation there is, the more opportunity there is to meet more consumer demand. We need to embrace more free trade, because if we have more customers, the planet, the 7 billion people, instead of just the 320 million Americans, well, then that's more jobs for us to meet other demand for 7 billion. We have 7 billion potential customers instead of 320 million. So that would create more job opportunities. But then again, I don't even know if we need jobs in the sense of how we know them today. Maybe we could just have something where people work a microscopic amount and pool their money into GoFundMes, and there's voluntary, just to each according to his need. I have no problem with that necessarily. But again, just like Hoppe on immigration, there's a problem. Quick, use the state to solve it. When the solution is, let's make everyone $1,000 a month dependent on the state, I don't buy that they know what the solution is. I think there's always a call to crisis from the state, which justifies more power. And that really is more of an issue than the divide and conquer. Why should we have so much power and so much money? Well, obviously, because you're going to lose your job, because others are innovating, because of free trade, because of immigrants, because of terrorists, because of the 1%. because of the immigrants, again, engaging in free trade, not just the ones freely migrating, because of potential computer issues. The Russians are hacking us, therefore we can't have free trade and trade with other countries. The Iranians, if we have free trade, are going to nuke us. I think all this is nonsense, and it's so convenient that every one of these issues lands the state with more power.
Okay, and do you have any thoughts on Trump impeachment?
Oh, yes, I absolutely support him being impeached. He has, on record, I think it was December 18th of 2017, 2016, say that he supports giving Saudi Arabia weapons through Raytheon, DynCorp, and Boeing and Lockheed Martin to fund a genocidal, quite literally, a starvation project in Yemen. The Saudi government is trying to engage in regime change in Yemen. So, in the same way, in the 90s, when Clinton and Father Bush implemented sanctions against the Iraqi people in hopes Saddam might be negatively affected, the Saudis are doing the same thing in Yemen today. And, Madeleine Albright didn't seem to care when she was on 60 Minutes with Leslie Stahl. Asked, about 500,000 children have died. That's more than Hiroshima. Is the price worth it for these Iraqi sanctions? And the secretary, ambassador to the UN says, that's a tough call, but we think the price is worth it. So, again, I see these large-scale atrocities go unnoticed while the Ukrainian phone call, I actually didn't even see anything bad in that. I think the Russia thing is an absolute hoax. I know Rachel Maddow was getting sued because she said One America News was funded by the Russians. Very rarely can you get like an actual, this is a lie. Usually it's like this innuendo, why is he palling around with Putin, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I support impeachment. I support impeachment because of the red flag laws. I support impeachment on grounds of he believes he has the right to forcibly stop two consenting parties from trading if one party lives in America and party B lives in China. These are all things that we would, punish a private individual for doing. So, of course, we should just look at Trump the same way we did before he became president, as a private individual. Can do anything he wants, but can't initiate violence against peaceful people. So, yes, much like Ron Paul voting for the impeachment of Bill Clinton, he said, well, yeah, I'm supporting this because Bill Clinton just bombed a pharmaceutical factory in Sudan. This is going to lead to blowback terrorism. This creates enemies. This killed civilians. Look at what he's implementing in Iraq. So, yes, I'm voting for impeachment, but not for the lying in a deposition argument. I see the same thing with Trump today. They're always trying to get you on something trivial that only applies to your party this way. Because if you take it on principle, well, then both parties are finished. I mean, which party supports the CIA? Okay. Which party supports the drug war? Party of
Keith, I
Yes.
think we lost you. Can you go back about 10 seconds there?
Back. I'm not sure where I was there. My whole point was that the two parties, Democrats and Republicans, will try to come up with and that applies to the party, like illusion, or out on a hot mic saying I'll have more flexibility after my second election, rather than focusing on the large crimes that there's evidence for, such as Trump conspiring with the Saudis to fund a war in Yemen, which he made clear in the White House press statement that I discuss in a video. I can't remember the date, so this is how I'm sourcing my. I titled the video "America's Foreign Policy of Deception, Lies, Omissions, and Criminality." Long story short, they get us arguing about over nonsense, so we can't see that both parties are fundamentally the same, insofar as they both advocate initiating violence against peaceful people.
Okay, so I know we're up against the end here, so let's try, like, I guess, lightning round, see if we can get quick questions and answers on a few things before we got to close out here. Bait wants to know, how do you feed people who can't get jobs? Now, there's a quick answer to that.
How do I what?
Feed people who cannot get jobs.
Any of the million voluntary churches, private, family, friends. If you're in a voluntary society, there's more of an incentive to be kind to others, to make friends, in hopes that if you're ever going hungry, you can get people to feed you. If you have private property, that increases the likelihood you'll be able to save. You won't have a Federal Reserve that diminishes the currency, so you could save more in case you ever do lose a job. And you are faced with starvation. Make sure there's fewer regulations so more people have the ability or the right to produce food on their land so they could store things. That is my lightning answer.
Thoughts on the Libertarian Party?
The Libertarian Party, since people like Tom Woods, Pete Quinones, Dave Smith, and Scott Horton, and Jason Stapleton started ambitiously engaging in it, gives me all the hope in the world. I see it as one of the many mechanisms for explaining the non-aggression principle, voluntarism and self-ownership, and that's just other. I do see a lot of potential, though. Voluntarists are joining XR work. They're unhappy with the way permits done divide Libertarian instead of trying to message of freedom.
Thoughts on bump stocks?
Government has no right to manipulate bump stocks.
I don't know what this user means. They ask, what is your opinion on Article 13? Do you know what they're talking about?
It looks therefore intellectual property claims to justify internet censorship are illegitimate.
Oh, okay, that's the EU thing, so I caught that. So I know there's a little bit of an audio issue just for anyone else that was saying. He was basically saying that intellectual property claims are the basis for Article 13 and it's therefore illegitimate. Is that correct characterization?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Do you think the death penalty should be abolished?
All right. You still with me?
Yes. So last one. I know we're right at the end, at a edge of time here. Last question. Do you think the death penalty should be abolished?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I don't trust the government if they told me there was sand on the beach. I'd have to get a second opinion. So to give them the right to execute people based on evidence provided in the coercively funded monopoly court system, I do not trust any more than I trust OJ about what happened with his ex-wife. Are you justified in killing people who have done something so immoral they can't possibly repay, and you don't want to have other people pay for them to live? Well, sure. In some cases, I think people are absolutely justified in killing someone, but that in no way means that I support the state having a death penalty policy. In the same way, I wouldn't say I'm against crime, therefore the Koch brothers should have the right to kill anyone who was found guilty in Koch court. I just see it as a non sequitur.
Okay. All right. So I know you said you wanted to finish up 7 year time, so I guess we can call it there. Thank you so much for coming out. Everyone, this has been Keith Knight. Again, his Twitter is AN_capitalist, and his YouTube is, oh shoot, what is the tagline? Don't tread on anyone?
Yes, I'm attempting to take the neocon statement of "Don't tread on me." well, no one wants to be treaded on themselves. My attempt is to get the philosophy and promote it universally. So don't tread on anyone is a far superior ideal to don't tread on me. That is the thinking behind the title.
Okay, both of those are in announcements. Once again, just thanks. Thank you so much for coming out. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, absolutely. Thank you for having me on, man. Take care.
Thanks. You too.